Welcome everyone to a joint webinar between Booking Kit and Arrival. We are discussing the very interesting and very promising phenomenon of the kind of digital leap that this past year has forced our industry into. And I have no one better to discuss this with me than Douglas, CEO of Arrival. Hand it over to you briefly. I guess you don't need much introduction. You're quite a famous famous person in this industry, but go ahead.
Oh, shucks, you're making me blush. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people from so many different countries. It just always reminds me of just how diverse and international and amazing this industry is. So thanks so much for joining all of us. So we have, I think, a pretty exciting agenda over the next hour or a little bit less than an hour. We'll just be talking a little bit about the recovery, but really how it ties into the role of technology and the digitization. That's a tough word to get out across our industry, and most importantly, what does it mean for operators across Europe and really around the world? So whether you're a small operator or a large operator, whether you are a ticketed attraction or a tour company or an activity, what are the implications? How are travelers thinking about these changes, and how can you implement some of these things? And Olivia has prepared some pretty amazing detail and some data from the Booking Kit. I guess, what would you call that? Your environment, all of your customers, it's all anonymized.
Ecosystem.
Really, yes, the ecosystem. Great, perfect word. To really bring some of that to life, which is great.
Thank you for the overview, Douglas. And why don't we jump right in, starting to talk about an uneven recovery?
Yeah, super. So as most of you, if not all of you know, I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S. And in the U.S., travel really is back. In fact, if you've been reading some of the media coverage, we just had our Independence Day holiday here, July 4th, and travel, so air travel and other travel indicators show that domestic travel anyway is now ahead of 2019 levels. So travel has really come back in force here in the United States. I think part of it too is because so many of us were not yet ready to quite go to Europe, although that's beginning to happen. We can't go to Canada yet. We can't, there's still concern about traveling to Latin America, although that's also happening. So our international travel continues to be quite restricted, but as a result, the domestic market really is benefiting from that. I want to quickly share from our survey work earlier this year to highlight, however, that while there's all this media attention around the recovery and the outlook, and of course we in the industry, we want to take a very positive and optimistic view, right, of what's to come. I think we also have to be, real and honest about the nature of the recovery and the outlook, so that all of us can plan, depending upon what segment or sector of the industry you operate in, what destination you're in. So when we asked operators in our survey just a month or two ago, just looking at North America, this is from a sample of a little over 1,000 operators. You can see that while a meaningful percentage, about a quarter, say that their business is at or exceeding 2019 levels in primarily the US and Canada, a significant percentage, a little less than about 40% or so, really saying, our business is more than half of operators. Our business is not even, it's less than 40% of what it was in 2019. So it's very uneven in terms of who's benefiting as travel recovers. And so travel is recovering in kind of very nuanced or very specific ways. If we look at Europe, that disparity between the top performing operators and those operators that are still struggling to recover is even more pronounced. And we'll talk, I think, a little bit about what is is going on there. Olivia, you want to jump in here?
Absolutely. So definitely, that is something that we've noticed with operators who work with us, that the recovery is uneven. It depends very much on the sector. However, as a kind of sign, a very promising sign, this is kind of like a general graph of our booking numbers that we've seen from 2019 through 2021. So through, I think the latest was yesterday. This is, of course, data for online bookings, so it doesn't show maybe the whole picture. And there's a lot of businesses that deal with online vouchers and stuff included in here. Maybe cooking schools, for example, which explains why there's usually a peak around Christmas time. But everything that we've seen before July 2019 is basically remaining at the same level. And what we didn't expect at all would be to see such a huge spike between the two lockdown periods that we experienced here in Europe. So the lockdown in Germany, Italy, and France, which are our main markets, it kind of coincided, overlapped a little bit. This was kind of around winter last year. And then, as you can see, the moment that kind of a reopening right before summer was announced, we experienced a huge peak. So people really do want to get out and experience our activities. And as soon as kind of the government provided that assurance that people needed, and as soon as people had a plan for reopening, we really saw a giant spike, much larger than what we had ever experienced before. And similarly, actually, in the second lockdown, we noticed that, yes, there was a reduction in the number of online bookings, but still it wasn't to the point that it was a complete standstill as it was the first time. People still had enough confidence that, okay, we've been through this before. We know how to handle this now. There was more digitization already. There was more adaptations of tools that helped people still retain cash flow and in order to be able to generate more bookings. So very interesting to see that, again, the moment that second reopening was communicated, we again saw this really nice upward trend in bookings. So yes, it's true that it's uneven, and we'll go into it a little bit more into the kind of the ones who are benefiting and the ones who aren't. But it's still a very promising sign that the demand is definitely there for our industry.
Yeah, and we'll dive into this in detail. I mean, basically what we're seeing is, and this I'm sure what we've all, and I hope you've all been kind of reading and seeing, is that certain segments have done very well and other segments continue to struggle. So we see, for example, outdoor adventure activity, kind of small group experiences, domestic, nearby, doing very well. We also, in the US, we've seen, as you've all probably been reading, that the United States response to the pandemic has been quite distinct from how most of Europe has responded. And we've had a very uneven approach to restrictions and lockdowns here. And there have been certain markets, certain destinations that have remained largely open, and those have continued to do quite well. And in particular, in those destinations that have had the lightest restrictions, their volumes have already well exceeded 2019 levels to some degree, if we look at kind of markets in Florida and the Southeast as well. However, we also see in other urban markets, and markets that have had a more kind of a more restrictive approach to responding to the pandemic and tighter lockdowns, some of these cities just beginning to reopen. Here's just one example of, for example, in Seattle, one of the country's leading food tour operators, Savor Seattle, which is still not planning to run their food tours until next year. And we see kind of similar things in New York and elsewhere. So the market is, and how it's responding and reopening is very uneven, very different, again, depending upon the segment, but also the destination. Basically, in a nutshell, it's kind of outdoor versus indoor. It is more secondary secondary destinations versus your kind of primary major urban or metro destinations. And we would expect to see, something, similar in Europe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into maybe some of the specifics here, I was actually wondering if you guys could tell us a little bit which industries you guys are operating. That would be really interesting for us. We'll post a poll shortly in the chat. So if you guys want to just leave your vote, it would be really nice to to see what a diversity of listeners we have at the moment. So that'll come up in just a second. You'll be able to see it on the chat. As Douglas was saying, absolutely, we see a very similar trend. Here, we're looking more at the exact verticals. We see a really high spike in city tours. So this was, again, the whole last summer and this summer overview. Boat trips. So again, that outdoors, open airs is for very obvious reasons. It's what's performing the best. City tours again. So the top two places are for city tours. Canoe and kayak, water sports, all of these types of things are rebounding quite well and seeing quite a high volume of bookings come back in. And actually here, I just wanted to highlight one of our dear customers. We've worked very closely with them. They mentioned that kind of from one day to the next, like many vendors, they saw kind of their bookings evaporate. And through, expanding their network, so always pivoting, right? Always staying on their toes, making sure that they have kind of the latest technology and not stopping, basically being very proactive. They were able to connect to new sales channels and really rapidly increase the bookings that they were hoping to gain over last summer, and to the point that they managed to expand their fleet of boats. So actually, it ended up being quite a happy story out of something that could in many ways freeze people's hopes and expectations for their tour or activity. And continuing just quickly before we review the results of the poll, there were also, in our cases, I just wanted to highlight some, I guess, less expected winners. Generally outdoor has done really well, but we noticed that it's activities that have like a highly local focus. I think this is what you were mentioning, Douglas, with, that not the typical, only going to Paris to see the Eiffel Tower type of activity, but also generally enjoying what locals like to do. And what we saw was jump houses. It kind of blurs that line between indoor and outdoor. It's a type of activity that, yes, is still open, but still inside. And it was a very interesting bounce back, no pun intended, as it's an indoor activity, but they really were able to preserve that good use case, that good hygiene concept in order to be able to open quickly and successfully. So we did see a couple of these very interesting use cases. And generally, these activities are the ones that we expect will still remain winners in this rebound, because, as you said, it's not so much about kind of the highly touristic things that we generally associate as being touristy, but it's a lot more now also about just local experiences, embracing what really makes a place unique. And I also wanted to just highlight a quote that I found that I thought was very interesting on Euronews. They basically predict that touristic travel, it'll still involve multiple locations, but that the pace will be slower. And it'll be much more about kind of the journey, or as much about the journey in a comparison to the destination itself. And I thought that was quite nice, and that at least I know it echoes my sentiment. I don't know if, Douglas, you also agree that this is something that you guys are seeing in your research.
Well, I think it's a great point. I think just the fundamental nature of travel this year has changed for obvious reasons. So just the travelers' approach to thinking about it and planning their trips is changed profoundly. I mean, we've just completed some consumer research where we see a pretty similar indicator. I mean, just, for example, the drive to reconnect with friends and family is while it's always been a big driver of travel, it's just gone completely off the charts.
Sure.
However, I think one really interesting question for all of us to think about, longer term is, how much of this, all these changes that we're seeing, how much of this is a blip? How much of this is really just because of the uniqueness of the current, situation, and how much of this will really will our industry retain? Will it persist? So, good examples are secondary, say, drive markets here in the U.S., which have already well exceeded 2019 levels. Will that continue? So as normal pre-pandemic trends kind of start to return, as people are more comfortable going internationally and doing more of those types of trips that we've always done, are we going to see a dip in some of the, for example, some of the bounce back that you just shared with us, Olivia, right, or some of the destinations here? So I think that's, an important question as we think about if it's not a return to normalcy, but certainly a return to the type of travel that we've been accustomed to. So I'm still inclined to think that this is a bit more of a special kind of year, or the next year and a half, as opposed to necessarily a continuing, a persistent trend.
But definitely, I would say good news for our industry as a whole, because it's maybe prompting people to engage in activities that they wouldn't otherwise do when traveling. So I do hope that it'll bode well for us. Just quickly before we continue, the results of the poll seem to be in. The largest segment of our viewers are within walking tours, boat tours, so like within the tours section, followed by others. So I'm guessing there's maybe a couple of res tech people in here. I wonder. And then followed by, we've got a couple of attractions, a couple of outdoor activities, some water sports. So really nice to see a very diverse group. And again, thanks for joining us. And I will hand over again to Douglas.
Great. Yeah, super. So I think we've been hinting at this, really, that the recovery, will not wait. The way I've been speaking about this at our own events and guiding operators is there are some just very fundamental, compelling economic circumstances around the current situation, and as we emerge from the pandemic, which are quite unexpected, but really positive for our industry. Basically, whether you look in the US or Europe, here we're showing Europe, but key economic indicators around individual sort of consumer financial health are extremely positive. Whether we look at the savings rate, or we look at overall consumer sentiment has also shot up dramatically over the past year. We also see this in particular in the US, where those upper income travelers, so in this case defined as households earning at least $100,000 a year, they have done especially well because of the performance of stock markets and other trends within the global economy. And it's those travelers, both in Europe but also in the US, that really represent a significant portion of total trips, total bookings, and also spend for tours and activities and attractions. So this is a very positive indicator, and we've seen a lot of this as well. So as soon as a restriction is eased, once a government here or there, they just open the spigot a little bit, then that water simply just pours right through. So people are ready. Demand is there, but also that capacity, that willingness to spend. And we're seeing it here, clearly in the US, and we will see this in Europe as restrictions continue to ease.
Absolutely. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of at the state where if I do go to a museum or if I do kind of partake in an attraction, I don't think so much or so closely about the price anymore. It's more just like, I haven't done something in a long time. I really just want to take advantage, and the intrinsic value of it has grown quite a bit for me. And I'm guessing that this is a very kind of shared popular sentiment as well. So also speaks loudly to.
Yeah, but you make that's a really good point about pricing. And it's an interesting debate. We think about, so the last recession in 2008, 2009, 2010, as travel emerged from that recession, the fundamental outcome of that recession was a very significant impact on the individual consumer sentiment, on our own personal financial health. And so we saw discounting and pricing was a huge driver to get demand coming back into the market. Here it's completely different. And in fact, one of the big surprises over the past year is how well economies and individual, personal financial health has performed over the past year and a half. So in fact, really, we should not be looking necessarily at discounting. In other words, it's not like a cheaper price. It's going to get people back onto your tours or back to your activities. It's really a very different. It's really about restrictions. It's about enabling travel and reopening travel. So that's, I think, a really important thing to keep in mind as we look at kind of getting back in the market. Don't jump right into discounting. And in fact, we're seeing here in the U.S. as well, prices have been quite high, and in fact, we have the other issue, which is inflation, has been a big issue here in the U.S. market.
And actually, if it's not necessary to discount in order to get people to buy, then it's also very good for that much needed lack of cash flow that we're still trying to make up for. So I think, it bodes very, very well. And also, this leads us, I think, very nicely into the tech acceleration and where kind of these bookings are going to be coming from.
Yeah, sure. So so for those of you who've seen me present this before, I have done this a couple of times, but I think it's so important that I'm going to do it again, and I won't stop doing it because I think it's a really important message for our industry to understand. So historically, tourist activities and attractions have really lagged the rest of the travel industry. So if we look at where online penetration is, that is the share of all bookings made online for tours and activities in 2019, it was actually at about 2005, 2006 levels relative to the broader travel industry. So flights, hotels, car rental, and so forth. However, as we now look at 2021, the indicators are that we're basically doing a kind of 10-year, leap or kind of jump. There's been a rapid digitization of the industry that's both demand-driven or traveler-driven, as well as supply-side or industry driven. And we'll talk through some of those drivers shortly. But I think Booking Kit, Olivia, you've seen a similar dynamic.
Absolutely. And I think in that case, this graphic kind of speaks for itself. Again, you can see the echo of right where the lockdowns took place. But this just very, very simply compares the online bookings that we've seen come through our platform versus the offline bookings. And yes, there's always a kind of significant portion of bookings that are offline, but you can see that the lines are getting further and further apart, and they're just going to continue trending in that direction. So it's not to forget altogether about offline bookings, as we'll speak about in a moment, but the importance of online is just escalating, and it continues to grow exponentially.
Olivia, here, do you include both your online partner bookings, or are this just operator websites versus direct offline channels?
All online, so also including OTAs. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right. Super. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the drivers, like what's behind that. I think that this is really super important. So first of all, whereas historically travelers and this sector has been kind of famously last minute, like people arrive or they book most of their things with close to the departure for their trip or where they're in market. That's changed quite dramatically. So there's lots of advanced planning now because travelers want to know, first of all, what's open, what can they do, what are some of the circumstances around health and safety, what do they need to know. There have been lots of operational changes, as we all know about. We don't have to rehash all of those, but there's this desire to understand what can I expect, what's going on. And depending upon the type of traveler I am, I might be more or less concerned about risk and health and safety, but everyone wants to know what is happening and what they can expect. So there's a lot more advanced planning, and actually quite well in advance. The other piece to it too is, however, is travel confidence. So in other words, travelers really want to understand that they and have the confidence that they will be able to travel and that they won't have to cancel. In a study that was just done by Generali Global Assistance, when they looked at all of the big concerns around planning travel kind of this summer and into the fall, the number one concern, well above risks around health and safety and catching COVID or anything like that, was simply, will they be able to go? Will they have to cancel? And will they be able to get their money back or be able to reschedule flexibly if they do have to cancel? So this is the number one concern. So what we're seeing as a result, driven by travelers, lots of advanced planning. Of course, that's all happening online. Booking is last minute, but it will still be in advance and online. Once they are sure that they are ready, that they can go, they won't have to cancel, then they will book. But it's going to be in advance, and it's going to be online. I would love to hear, even just if you don't mind putting in the chat, it'd be great to see what you're seeing. You know, if you guys are seeing kind of similar things in terms of, are you seeing lots of kind of advanced, searching, but then, last minute booking? And if you can track that on your sites, it'd be just really interesting to see if you're hearing that as well. But clearly, the takeaway is provide as much information, get your digital presence as good as it can be. Make sure that your cancellation, your refund policies are as flexible as possible. And the other piece I would say too is, I know there's been a historical debate between OTAs and operators where OTAs have really been pushing a lot of you to really shorten those last minute, those booking windows. But, as short as you can make them, we would really encourage you to do that, just given the nature of how travelers are thinking about their upcoming trips.
Absolutely. Very good point. And on the topic of cancellation, one of the things that's becoming more and more important, like you said, as a decision maker for people who are booking travel, is, will I be able to cancel easily? Will I be able to be refunded easily? And we know that this, from an operational perspective, can be very difficult if done manually. And so again, just to give a little bit of real life context to what we're saying, here's an example from La Brasserie Stéphanoise, which is a client of Booking Kits, and we've spoken to them recently, and they mentioned that they, one of the central ways that they were able to deal with this crisis was because they were able to manually, to automate a lot of their cancellation processes, and to be able to offer vouchers as well. That way you don't lose the cash flow. These types of considerations become very important. And the more that cancellations and changes in bookings, and like you said, the more that flexibility is going to remain part of this market, this is one of the reasons why we as Booking Kit even exist. And it's one of the values that we really hold dear, and that we try to communicate about as much as possible, because this flexibility comes at a high price if you're going to do it manually, and if you're going to try to coordinate all your efforts across channels and whatnot. So this is something for us that, like you said, we definitely encourage to automate in the best way possible, because it's also something that now customers are going to demand. It's not going to really be optional anymore. And speaking of no longer optional, it's almost as if I had seen the slide in advance. Online booking is just generally considered no longer optional. And at this point, I'd like to maybe just start another quick poll, if you guys wouldn't mind. When you as a traveler, when you go somewhere, would you rather book kind of everything in advance and have everything planned out, or do you like to actually arrive and have some degree of spontaneity in terms of what you do for in-destination experiences? So if you want to leave your opinion, the poll will pop up any second on the chat. We'd be very interested in hearing.
Hey, so Olivia, while we're waiting for people to respond to the poll, there's a question from John Coupland about among online bookings, about the split between mobile and desktop. And in our own surveying, we've seen that inch up, pretty significantly over the past several years, approaching 30 to 40% of total online bookings. Olivia, can you share what you guys are seeing at BookingKit?
Definitely. We're seeing a very similar trend. I don't have the exact numbers as part of this presentation, but I would gladly follow up, John, and give you a little bit more insights there. But I would say the trend looks very similar to the online versus offline booking in terms of a lot more bookings are coming in mobile. People are just generally on the go and want to be able to book on the go.
Yeah, again, though, with a lot of this channel segmentation, so much of it depends on the segment
Sure.
as well. So we see, for
Sure.
example, like in the case of, especially I think during this time as well, like if I'm going to take my kids to where I live in Atlanta, if I'll take them to the Fernbank Museum, which is a kind of a science and natural history museum here in Atlanta, I know the museum inside and out. It's super easy for me to book the tickets on my phone. Actually, it's not super easy on their website, but that's another issue. But in theory, right? Like I know the brand, I know the place, and so I don't have to call somebody to find out if they're going to have this or do that. So it's very easy to do. Whereas if I'm planning something that is a bit more substantial, maybe it's an adventure experience, I might need to call somebody, or I want to read a bit more about the nature of the experience. Then we see, in that case, the adventure and outdoor experiences tend to be a bit more kind of desktop oriented. Right. So a lot of it does depend on the type of activity that you're booking.
I can imagine, but I also think that with all of these OTAs, and also, I'll take my own example for Airbnb. Last year we went and we did a kind of like outdoor canoeing, whatever experience. I also felt very comfortable just booking something like that just over the app, no questions asked, because these OTAs give you a lot of assurances, and they invest a lot also in their mobile experience as well. So I think that that's also slowly educating the consumer in like being a little bit more daring with these kinds of things as well. And if there's a clarification question, there's usually some sort of chat functionality or whatnot to help you. So I definitely, I see your point, and it totally depends on the experience, but I think to a certain extent as well on maybe the comfort of the user too.
Yep, no, for sure. There's so many variables involved.
Absolutely.
Well, it's interesting to look at just the results from the poll, where more of you said, you prefer to have some spontaneity, some flexibility in your trip, which of course makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
And we'll talk about that, shortly. So especially with regard to attractions and activities that involve larger groups, of course, the buzzword or the discussion has been around social distancing and, of course, capacity management. And we've seen widespread adoption across a variety of ticketed attraction experiences to introduce both timed entry and capacity management, so they can control and manage the number of people that will enter the facility at any one time, and also so they can undertake contact tracing. And I just give the example here of, which I'm sure you all know, the Smithsonian Museum organization in the United States, which is a public institution. It's always been free. There are multiple museums in our nation's capital, but they've implemented a ticketing and admission system specifically for timed entry across most of their museums. So then the interesting question here again is, is this going to continue, and how do travelers feel about it? And so there was an interesting study done in the UK earlier this year, where they surveyed attraction visitors on the impact of if they were required to book in advance and to book a time slot, if that would impact their decision making on whether they would attend. And as we can see here, about 30% of attraction visitors said that it would turn them off from visiting the attraction. And it makes sense to a certain degree. Look, this is our vacation. We want to do what we want when we're traveling. We don't want to have to necessarily be locked into a specific schedule. And we also see that this applies differently to different types of attractions or experiences. So for those attractions or experiences that really are a driver for a trip, if it's a must-do experience, it's really why I'm going to the destination, then we see a much higher incidence of pre-planning and pre-booking. Whereas if it's more of a secondary activity or kind of a nice to have, like let's say I've got a free afternoon and there's a museum over here, why don't we pop in and have a look? Then we see there's going to be a lot more kind of last minute or walk up type of demand. So for us, the key takeaway here is, on the one hand, for an attraction, there are obvious benefits of having the ticketing and the advance booking in place, because you've got such better data. In fact, even speaking to the Smithsonian, they were saying how they've got visibility, forward-looking insight into demand for their attractions that they had never had before. And that's creating all sorts of new possibilities and insights for them. So the business benefit to operators is profound by implementing these systems. At the same time, you also need to be mindful that there's a segment of your potential customer base that may be put off by having to lock themselves into a specific time slot. And especially if, and this is where you have to be a bit honest with yourself, if you're not necessarily like a top tier attraction in your destination, but if you're really a secondary attraction, you need to think about your approach to this, and where we really advise a kind of hybrid approach. So how can you provide potentially walk-up options for those customers that would like to visit but don't necessarily want to plan and book in advance?
Absolutely. And Thomas here had an interesting comment that this could also depend on the country of origin, and that maybe this is a different statistic for Asian travelers, which at the moment we're not seeing so much of due to circumstances, but also maybe something to consider when these kind of larger, maybe pre-booked holidays and whatever come back, that this might sway once more.
Yeah, no, I think there are a lot of variables involved too. Another is families, right? When you're, if I'm traveling with and we see this too in our research as well, but if I'm taking the family to Orlando and the kids to Disney World, you want to make sure everything is perfect. But if it's a young couple and you want to be a little bit more flexible, then so there's a lot of different variables there as well.
Absolutely. But still speaks very strongly, I think, to a hybrid model, right? You give options to every type of visitor. And for us, putting a hybrid model into practice has various elements, one of which is kind of the ability to manage quotas, which for us is very much associated with the ability to manage like bookings that come in from different channels. So one of the keys, or one of the ways that we see this as being very successful, is when you can kind of define how many bookings you would want from each source, and also that you could kind of divide up, okay, I would like, to save 300 time slots for, presential bookings, kind of spread them out. In that way, you don't run the risk of, if someone cancels, then all of a sudden, you're left without a spot that's there and available. Then your availabilities are automatically kind of updated throughout the web. So this is a very kind of easy way to, in the background, kind of allow the system to work for you while still designating these slots for online or offline. And you also mentioned the topic of capacity management. This is something we've written about extensively in the last couple of months, because the concern is no longer around how do I fit and jam as many people in here as possible. The concern is now, how do we make a very kind of like seamless flow of visitors, and how do we kind of take advantage of a lull in visitors here and a peak in visitors there? How do we actually keep an overview of everybody who we have in at the moment? And this is where kind of BookingKit is working closely with POS systems, with entry management systems, and to coordinate everything and kind of be that central cog for capacity management, because it's no longer, as I said, about trying to cram in as much as possible. It's how can I do this in the kind of most intelligent way possible? And actually, this hybrid model and these time slot tickets that you mentioned are actually provide a great opportunity, like we said, we mentioned this earlier, for maybe testing out some new pricing. So with an increased kind of perceived value of the exclusivity of an event, or just generally of being able to go to a museum and enjoy it with your family, it could be a great way to say, okay, I want to incentivize more people to come on Monday, so I'll leave a lower price on Monday, but on Sunday, it's like my highest day, so I will increase the prices during these time slots. It also, that way you can kind of, compensate for some of the lost revenue over time. But at the same time, you might actually notice that your experience has more intrinsic value than what you initially thought. This is, again, a little bit related to the virtual versus the presential gap. So how is it that, everybody who's worked so hard to adapt to a kind of more virtual presence during the pandemic, how does that now fit in to this new reality of being able to attend in person?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Great. Just quickly though, before
Sure.
we just jump here, I just want to circle back to the last comment you made about, in particular, around pricing. That, of course, the next kind of really interesting extension to this as well is the possibility of dynamic pricing as well. And so, Olivia, you talked about, okay, if you've got certain days where Monday or Tuesday is going to be kind of a low demand day, and you might offer lower prices, or maybe you offer, if you're water sports and you have a 9 o'clock departure and a 1 p.m. departure, you might price your 9 a.m. departure a little bit earlier, lower than, say, the more popular afternoon or evening departure. But another piece to this too is, once you are able to really think about capacity management and kind of manage your demand dynamically, you can also start to play with pricing, which is something that, of course, airlines and hotels have been doing for years, where maybe you offer kind of a lower price if you book in advance,
Right.
and then as you see demand really starting to fill up, then you can offer higher prices, last minute. You've only got a few slots left, and you can build marketing around that. On the flip side, if you really see demand is not where you'd like it to be for certain departures, you can then do some interesting kind of discounting across opaque channels. There's a lot of really interesting applications for capacity, the capability of capacity management, just beyond simply kind of managing how many people and knowing how many people you have, but really about, just increasing your yield, right? And getting, topping off the revenue, right? With smarter pricing techniques.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that this trend towards last minute is here to stay, at least for a while. So yeah, it seems like a very opportune moment, if it's possible, to try something like this. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So into virtual. So we wanted to touch on this because virtual tours and experiences have been talked about, as you all know, so much over the past year and a half, and we've had some really big brands, whether it's Airbnb or in this case Amazon, really step in to the virtual experience, and there have been many other platforms around the world that have kind of stepped in, and many operators, some who have found some pretty interesting success and created some new businesses. But it's quite amazing. Like, basically, now anybody can get pretty much anything or have any kind of experience virtually these days as a result of the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Do you want to touch a bit on what you've done here?
Yeah, these are just, I wanted to show just two real life examples of how this is applied to booking kit vendors. This is just one example of a tour guide in Rome who just started doing these like group virtual tours and received quite a good number of bookings throughout the crisis. So a very quick pivot to say, what can we do easily with the camera? What can we do with the kind of the resources that we already have at our disposal? And that obviously worked, and people were definitely interested. And the same thing here with escape games, obviously indoor, small groups, but still a lot of contact. They took it, ran with it, and went for virtual experiences as well, accompanied by maybe a physical kind of gift or whatever to make it a little bit more enticing. So definitely some really quick pivoting there from our clients, which proved to be a very important to keep them afloat.
Yeah, which is great. But we've also seen from our research that while a lot of operators have done this, the actual financial benefits, commercial impact has been frankly not not great. There's certainly been some standout success stories, and some companies. There's one fantastic museum tour company in New York called Museum Hack, which really launched an entirely new business called team building, where they do corporate events and team building exercises virtually. And you could certainly see applications, especially with so many people working from home and the whole work from home situation now, that marketplace really opening up. So that's a long-term potential business opportunity. But, for the most part, operators have not, it's been pennies on the dollar for virtual experiences, although there have been some pretty interesting applications. A segment, however, that we're a bit kind of more interested in, and we think that there's bigger opportunity around, is actually self-guided tours and experiences. So this is the possibility where a traveler will, through an app, they arrive in destination and they can experience an attraction, or they can do a walking tour or kind of gamified experience in market simply by following this experience through an app. And I've been pretty amazed to see over the past 3 to 4 years, there have been a real kind of flowering of startups and companies that have stepped into this sector, either to offer their own self-guided tours, or to provide platforms to enable operators and activity providers to introduce their own self-guided experiences for tour and activity operators. And we think this is quite interesting because it's not actually a new experience. They've been around for a while, in particular in the form of museum audio tours. And we found pre-pandemic that they were quite widely used. So 1 in 10 travelers and 1 in 5 tour takers have done some type of self-guided kind of mobile app or audio tour, whether it's in a museum or whether it's through a tour company. So the market clearly is there, and it's also something that's gotten a real boost and acceleration since the pandemic. And it speaks both to the independent traveler, that they want to learn more about a destination, but they just don't like traveling with groups. And then it also provides an upsell opportunity for tour and activity operators for you to bundle or package with an existing tour or experience that you run.
Precisely, and this is where I think all of the efforts that a lot of operators have invested in digitizing and providing some sort of a virtual experience. This is where you can actually still not just throw everything away and say, okay, I'll never need this again, but creatively you could bundle it with a related experience and offer it as a value add, or like you said, the whole self-guided tours as a way to bump up the price and as a way to kind of get people maybe engaged a little bit earlier or get people more looking forward to the experience. It's a great way to not just say, okay, I'm going to throw this all away, and to keep getting some value from all the hard work that's been done over the pandemic.
Okay.
And yes, now it takes us to OTAs and sales channels, the outlook for the other large segment of our industry.
Yeah, great, super. So, this is something we've been tracking very closely since the beginning of Arrival. OTAs have always been one of, if not the fastest growing channel within tours and activities. However, we've seen a real shift in the throes of the pandemic because of the big changes that we've talked about earlier, the real shift to local, more domestic or regional travel. So we've seen a real shift away from OTAs to some degree and more towards direct booking, directly with attractions or with tour and activity operators. We're tracking this closely for 2021 and look forward to seeing what the impact is now. And again, the interesting question here is this a pandemic blip, or is this part of a larger shift or a trend within our industry?
And actually what we're seeing is kind of goes against this trend, but I think it's more that, it could be that proportionally a lot of the bookings or more bookings are coming from websites, but the demand is higher. We're noticing a higher demand and we're noticing a higher number of bookings. So overall, I think the piece of the pie might be smaller, but the pie itself is getting bigger. And I think that's what we're noticing, that we are seeing quite a nice increase in the number of bookings coming from all of our connected OTAs in general. So I think that while it's not maybe as big of a percentage of people who are booking through OTAs, it's still considerable. But that being said, it's like beyond the point of being able to neglect your own website, I think, and having a very kind of easy, mobile-friendly or multi-device, responsive, conversion optimized checkout embedded in your website, and a very good understanding of your user flow is more important than ever to keep generating these bookings. And we've also noticed, actually, that in addition to the more common companies that we think of as our OTAs, our Get Your Guides, our TripAdvisors, we notice that there's also this push towards local has increased the importance of local resellers. And we've noticed it quite drastically. We have a new tool called Booking Kit Reach, which is basically digitizing this reseller relationship. And we've noticed it quite drastically that people are depending more on these relationships with hotels, with venues, now that the industry is starting to move to actually continue to be this new sales channel, basically, and continue to generate bookings that way through these relationships.
Yeah, it's a really important point to keep in mind. Just in our own research, I've identified more than 150 distributors, OTAs of different shapes and sizes and flavors. And so I know that when in these types of environments we talk about OTAs, everyone thinks, oh, it's Viator, Get Your Guide, Klook, but it's so much bigger than that. And we're also seeing some really interesting a trend of what I think of as really focused OTAs within our sector that are focused on a particular passion. I think this is especially important within tours and activities because, our industry isn't really an industry per se like hotels are, right? Or airlines, right? Like you can go to a website and you can compare different hotels. And yes, Hyatt is different from a Marriott, which is different from a boutique hotel, but you can kind of compare them effectively. But when you think about the consumer experience of searching for an activity, how do you compare a museum visit with a balloon ride, right? And yet you can do a search and they will come up in the same display, right? In the same set of results. And there's been a number of companies that have stepped in or raised capital over the last few years that might focus specifically on, let's say, adventure travel or outdoor travel or food tours or experiences with locals or cultural experiences. So yeah, and we're seeing more and more of that. So I would really encourage, all of you, depending upon the industry subsegment that you operate in, to explore them. There are a couple of fantastic, fast-growing OTAs in the boat rental and yacht charter world, for example, like Get My Boat and another. So there's lots of opportunity just beyond, the big kind of household names, so to speak, that we're all familiar with.
Absolutely. That's a great point. But I think we have to pivot to an even bigger household name.
Right. Of course. Yeah. So this is, we wanted to very quickly touch on Google. So we all know who Google is, obviously, but there's some pretty big changes afoot there. And as we've reported about at Arrival, going back, I think now it was almost 2 months when we first reported this. So Reserve with Google is shutting down. Reserve with Google, that is that booking path or that. So if you have your Google My Business listing for your tour or attraction, and if you have a buy tickets button for your experience, and not all operators do, it depends a bit on if you list on an OTA or if you've activated it with your reservation system, and if they're a partner with Reserve with Google. But basically, it enables a booking flow within the Google environment. So a user on Google never has to jump, unfortunately, to your website or to another booking channel. And the idea was to provide a more seamless booking experience for the traveler. But there were lots of challenges with the model. And so they're changing. They're getting rid of this buy tickets button and that booking flow. And they're going to be shifting to a links based model and an advertising based model that is similar to how the hotel path works within Google today. So if you go to Google, you do a search for hotels and you look for the Google product experience around hotel search, and you say pull up a Google My Business listing for a hotel, you'll see something like this where you've got featured ads on the top and then links on the bottom, which are free links. And it's our understanding, although Google hasn't released full details about this, but from the reporting we've done, partners we've spoken to, that there will be free links available both to the official operator or provider, as well as from some other partners and OTAs that will be there within this listing. And then, of course, the longer term expectation is that Google will unveil advertising and featured listing options as well. And so at this point, what I would normally do is ask Olivia if BookingKit is a partner and what they can share with us about it. But I believe everybody's under pretty tight NDAs, right? They don't pull any punches with us, do they?
Well, we have a lot of respect for our partners, especially for Google. So I can't really discuss the details at the moment, but what I can say is that we are communicating with them very closely and have been for a long time. We've been partners, obviously, with Reserve with Google as well, even before. So we are already preparing this transition in the background. And if you would like to know more, the best thing that you can do is just email us. We'll provide our email at the end. So please just reach out and get in touch. Because the gears are in motion for being able to have your reservation system prepared for what's coming next. Absolutely.
Great. Super.
Douglas, you have been, go ahead.
Well, just really quickly, just to thank everyone for joining us today. And, in pulling together some of our research for this event, these are really just going to scratch the surface, and we have a lot of research available and a lot of content at arrival.travel. A lot of it is free, so I'm not trying to sell you all anything, but I encourage you. There's a lot of great free resources there for operators in our industry. So please do encourage you to visit and have a look.
Absolutely. Arrival is our first reference whenever we want any industry details. So we can only but recommend it. And just as a very quick summary, travel is back. There's a lot of uneven recovery and some pent up spending capacity, and tech acceleration is coming exponentially. We see a lot of pre-bookings, but also a lot of these are last minute. Some people won't pre-book, so you need this kind of flexible hybrid model. And this hybrid model can include as an add-on maybe virtual self-guided tours, but presential is of course going to be what the industry refers to. Direct bookings are overtaking channel bookings, so it's very important to really take care of your own website. But it's a key sign of confidence in the industry. Google is relaunching its reservation system. So there's definitely a lot of promise in this 10-year leap that we've been forced to undergo. And just also a key, in summary, the key takeaways for success. Yes, these unexpected winners. We see a lot of online booking, and it's no longer really optional. A good direct booking experience over your website is more important than ever. Diversity in sales channels still remains very important. Customers are focusing on quick, straightforward ways to get cancellations and refunds. So making this very clear and easy and operationally carefree is going to be very, very important, as well as managing capacity, as well as kind of supporting that hybrid model. Bridging the online and offline divide is something that we hopefully can all take care of, and we can experiment a bit with time slots to find that sweet spot in pricing. But most of all, again, please invest in your own website, because it's going to continue to be more important, also with the developments in Google and all of these really great, exciting things to come for our industry. So all of that being said, I know it was a lot. I really hope you guys enjoyed this webinar. If you would like to receive a copy of these slides, we're more than happy to share them with you. If you could just email marketing@bookingkit.de and just put the word presentation in there. There's no need for any bells and whistles. We are happy to share this with you. We can also share some related material and ebook that Arrival and BookingKit have collaborated on. So we would be very glad to continue sharing with you. And without further ado, I guess, over to Douglas one last time.
Just thank you all for joining us, and thanks to Olivia and the BookingKit team for having us, and wish you all a successful summer season and beyond.
Very much agreed. Take care, guys, and hopefully we'll see you in our next webinar.